See man of the real buffalo, no Rastafari regime. Bush bungalow is where me dwell with me queen. Trash to the bone done in a camouflage green. None for them can't go the places we been. None for them can't see the sights where we seen. That's why them face all a twist up and a lean, I mean. Them better man we kick it off clean. Come on a gangster just like Gambine. That mean them can't serve Congo dread court subpoena, I mean. Oh, you want come in convene, I mean. Attorney of Iraq and come in, I mean. Me pocket them green like Sperling, I mean. Me regular fly out and flying, I mean. The stadium packed like sardine, I mean. Can't catch me speed off as the only caffeine. Run out of breath and antihistamine. Wash over gold, them coming like Listerine. You think I like way better than Al Pacino, I mean. Since people out there like Damian Marley, here's a bit of Damian Marley for you. All right. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're feeling nice. And if you don't yet, then hopefully I can lift your spirits a little bit with some boxing news and a bit of entertainment. All right. You know, we like to have a chit chat, a chin wag, and I tell you a few stories and what have you, give you my perspectives. So let's just do a little roll call here. 1 second. Let's restart the background music. So, who do we have in here? We got G-Man, salute, salute. Let's pop out the chat so I can see, my old eyes can see who's in here. Yes, G-Man, big up every time. We got, let's just call him Whitey. We got Dom. We got Rich. Big up, Jimbo Jones. Ra Hukum. We got Alette from New York City, NYC. All right. We got O'Neal. We got J&D. We got Ram. We got Team Batman Boxing. Deep Random Thinker. Wayne Fitness. Laughs in the Abyss. Jimbo Jones, Paul Daniels, great name. Andrew, big up. Anthony Hayweather, Waved. Molly, Luke Partridge, of course, he's always watching. 7 Deadly Sins, we got Chris in here. We got I Think Waffles Are Great. Prav, shout out to Prav. All right, I think, okay, you got Bexy as well. El Nino, Dan the Man. All right. I think I've read out everybody so far. Debiaka is another one. Jack, Rich Franklin, Daniel Gonzalez, Robert Guilford. Hello. Now, Anthony Hayweather says, how many Magnums have you had, Hatman? 0. I haven't touched alcohol since 2018. Yeah, 2018, April 2018. Not that I ever had a problem or anything like that, but I just decided to quit it because I was never really a massive drinker anyway. And, you know, as you get older, you think more about your health. So I haven't drunk since then. So, no, this is a natural high that I'm on. This is not any kind of alcoholic substance or green or, you know, narcotic. No, it's all a natural high, bro. In most of my videos, I try and stay like professional and on point, but my live streams are usually a bit more loose and informal. So yeah, you get a bit more of that's me in work mode when I'm doing most of my videos. Whereas on a live stream, it's me in R&R mode. Let's just put it that way. Rest and relaxation. What Eves says, Hatman Sober Life is good, yeah? Great, amazing. Amazing. A shout out to Warts. I won't say your whole name for obvious reasons. All right. I'm just going through the chat here to see if anyone even recognized. Somebody says my intro music was low the whole time. Yeah, it is quite low. Just to see if anyone recognized the intro that I did there with the singing, the rapping, or however you want to call it, by Damian Marley. I don't think anyone recognized it. Wow. Okay. There was Damian Marley fans in here the other day. And they were requesting some Damian Marley because somebody says nice singing. Well, you know, singing, rapping. Damian Marley. All right, so let's get into this boxing talk here. Okay, this guy, the Tyson Fury fan club, he must be trolling because of his name. Big up Fight Sport Talk every time over there in New Zealand. So, there you go. Did I even restart my music? Yeah, I did. Okay, music's there. All right. So Frank Warren is attempting to con the fans with desperate Tyson Fury propaganda. Now look, Frank Warren is obviously Tyson Fury's promoter. So he's paid to do PR for Fury. That's one of the things that promoters do, is they say stuff and promote, publicize, do PR for their fighters, okay, as well as making fights for them and, you know, doing the events and all that kind of stuff. They have to, or they're supposed to, talk good about them and always come down on their side no matter what. So I get it. That's what Frank Warren is supposed to do. But in this particular case, the PR is just so blatant that he's not even attempting to be the slightest bit objective. You see, Eddie Hearn, to his credit, and I've criticized Eddie Hearn plenty, especially over the past couple years, but to his credit, he doesn't tend to go quite as overboard with the PR he does for his fighters as Frank Warren. Not to say that he's objective with his fighters. He's not, Eddie Hearn. Not normally anyway. But he doesn't quite go as far and get as ridiculous as Frank Warren does. And this is an example of Frank Warren just getting outright ridiculous. So he's been doing the usual thing, trying to bully the media, anybody who's got any type of criticism for Tyson Fury. He's tearing into him. He's really upset and all this kind of thing. And of course, as people have pointed out, many people in the comment section of these videos that Frank Warren has done, these interviews, they've said, well, hang on. And the same goes with Gareth A. Davis, because Gareth A. Davis has been telling people to leave Tyson Fury alone. Well, hang on. Tyson Fury goes around tearing into all sorts of people, often without provocation, calling them names, this, that, and the other, like exactly like he did to Usyk, right? Before they actually signed to fight each other. Man was tearing into him with all this stuff. And it's like, okay, so Tyson Fury's allowed to do it, but the slightest bit of criticism of Fury from anyone else, and all of a sudden Frank Warren's outraged. And he's acting like, you know, these people are terrible and X, Y, and Z. So massive hypocrisy from Frank Warren. Tyson Fury, we don't even need to talk about his hypocrisy. But the most ridiculous thing that Frank Warren has said is right here. Okay, he said, he's talking about Fury, he's made a lot of money. He's had a fantastic career. He's the best British heavyweight, probably joint best heavyweight of his division, the worst case of this century. What brand of crack? And I'm not saying that Frank Warren actually does crack in case he tries to sue me. I'm being, I'm taking a leaf out of Frank Warren's book. I'm being hyperbolic. I'm being facetious. It's my saying on this channel. What brand of crack is he smoking? Right? So, Frank Warren claiming that Tyson Fury is joint best heavyweight, of the century. What an absurd claim. Absolutely ridiculous. First of all, Lennox Lewis was still fighting this century. Oh yes, Lennox Lewis beat Vitaly Klitschko this century. How about that? Furthermore, Tyson Fury lost to Alexander Usyk twice. Why is Frank Warren trying to act like that didn't happen? You see, Frank Warren predicted that Fury would knock Usyk out both times. Go back and check his predictions. Before both fights, he said that Fury was going to knock Usyk out. What happened to that, Frank? The only person who came close to getting knocked out was Tyson Fury, and he came very close to getting knocked out. Usyk never came close. So no, Usyk bested Fury twice, and somehow that makes Fury joint best heavyweight of the century. Absolutely ridiculous. He didn't beat him, and he doesn't have as good a resume at heavyweight as Alexander Usyk does. Oh no, he doesn't. Think about Usyk's resume. Tyson Fury beat Klitschko, what was it, over 10 years ago? or 10 years ago about, maybe it's coming up to 10 years ago, but it's about a decade ago, right? In terms of this generation, who has Tyson Fury beat? Deontay Wilder, Dylan White, whose chin was completely gone by the time he fought him, and Derek Chisora, who was totally washed up. They are the only three fighters that Tyson Fury has beaten of the current, continuing generation, right? The new generation would be, you could even argue that Daniel Dubois is like halfway between the new generation and the old. Alexander Usyk has beat Daniel Dubois. Has Tyson Fury beat Dubois? No, he hasn't. That's a young guy. That's a guy in his prime. Alexander Usyk beat him. Tyson Fury doesn't have a win like that. I would say that Usyk beating Dubois is a much better win than Fury beating Wilder, whose chin was done, or Derek Chisora. Alexander Usyk beat Anthony Joshua, a man that Tyson Fury's never stepped in the ring with, a man who Tyson Fury's now asking for $500 million to fight. And this is a washed up version of AJ that Fury wants $500 million to fight. The version of AJ who Usyk beat was still, fairly close to his prime. And he beat him twice. And of course, Alexander Usyk also beat Tyson Fury. So you look at Usyk's heavyweight resume, folks, it's clearly better than Tyson Fury's heavyweight resume. So how Frank Warren is trying to gaslight the public into thinking that Fury is the joint, worst case as well. Worst case. Unbelievable, which means he's suggesting that Fury is still the best heavyweight this century. Absolutely insane. Unbelievable propaganda from this guy. No, Frank, let it go. Stop being desperate. Stop being silly. I get he's your fighter. He's your client, however you want to describe him. So you have to do PR for him. But you make yourself look bad. I mean, not that Frank Warren cares about how he makes himself look. But yeah, he makes himself look bad. He makes himself look ridiculous. Pushing all this rubbish. But of course, Tyson Fury, as I explained in the video yesterday, is attempting to bamboozle and fool the fans once more. He's just reverting to type of what he always does. He knows that the water is deep in the heavyweight division. There are a lot of contenders out there that Tyson Fury's never fought. He's never fought Daniel Dubois, who's a champion, obviously. He's never fought Ajit Caballero. He's never fought Martin Bakole. He's never fought Zheli Zhang. He's never fought Bakadir Jalalov. He's never fought even Anthony Joshua, who I think is washed. There's a whole heap of other guys that Tyson Fury's never fought. It's not like this guy's been running through the heavyweight division. Tyson Fury's never done that. So, yeah, the whole thing is ridiculous. Anyway, Fury wants to avoid the deep waters at heavyweight, assess the lay of the land, wait until an opportunity comes up where he can leapfrog all the contenders because of his name and get a straight title shot against somebody who he perceives to be a vulnerable champion, maybe even a contender who's a cash cow for the right money. Yeah, that's what Fury's up to. And in doing so, if he comes out of so-called retirement and manages to do that successfully, he will then declare himself the greatest heavyweight of the era again, right? And so will Frank Warren by just beating one person. These guys, see, this is the difference between Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, or one of the many differences, is that Usyk has tried to fight his way into the history books, whereas Tyson Fury has tried to con his way into the history books. That's one of the main differences between them. Yeah, Usyk tried to fight his way into it. Fury's trying to con his way into it. Not that Fury doesn't have any good wins, but outside of the very few good wins that he has, which are spaced out over a very long period of time, it's just been con artistry from Tyson Fury. That's all it's been. Whereas with Alexander Usyk, no, it's just been, top fight after top fight after top fight. The only exception would be when he first moved up to heavyweight. He had a couple fights to acclimatize to the weight, which is normal. Far fewer than Holyfield did, by the way, when Holyfield moved up from cruiserweight to heavyweight. So, yeah, Frank Warren conning the fans. over Tyson Fury, talking absolute rubbish. You're talking rubbish, man, as Dylan White would say. Do me a favor, to borrow Frank Warren's own phrase. Do me a favor. Now, the topic of this stream was partly inspired by the Tyson Fury weirdos who, no matter what the subject of the video I make, will turn up in the comment section to talk about Anthony Joshua. I mean, normally they don't even talk about Tyson Fury, or if they do, they mention him a little bit here and there. But primarily, they'll turn up in the comment section of videos that have got nothing to do with Anthony Joshua to start going in on him. It is the weirdest thing. Anthony Joshua is a washed up fighter. Anthony Joshua, we know, because it's been proven in the ring, is not the best heavyweight in the world. You know, he tried to be the best heavyweight in the world and he failed. I mean, obviously, you know, when it comes to his losses to Alexander Usyk, he lost to Andy Ruiz, he got knocked out by Daniel Dubois. Tried and he failed. The guy, as far as I'm concerned, is finished. He's done for. Stick a fork in him. But these guys, these Fury weirdos, are still obsessed with him. Why are you obsessed with a washed up fighter? What is that all about? You guys are so weird. And anyway, one of these guys, one of these Fury weirdos who also will try to big up Luis Ortiz, yeah? Because one of the ways that they tried to, how can I describe it? They tried to overstate how great Fury's wins were over Wilder by saying that Wilder was this amazing champion and the greatest puncher of all time, and he beat the dangerous Luis Ortiz. You guys remember this narrative they were pushing? That the top three in the heavyweight division was Fury, Wilder, and Ortiz. Ortiz! How could Ortiz ever be a top three heavyweight? What has he ever done in the heavyweight division to say that he's top three? These weirdos turned up on my Lawrence Okolie video and they were talking about, AJ ducked Ortiz for you. I'm like, the video has nothing to do with Anthony Joshua. It's to do with Lawrence Okolie fighting a 50-year-old Ortiz. Why are you talking about? You guys are weird. All right. But anyway, just to show you how delusional these people are, let's entertain these idiots. So this is a screenshot, as you can see here, an article from Dan Rayfield when he was still working for ESPN, dated May 1st, 2019. And he's talking about Andy Ruiz signing to fight AJ as a late replacement for Jarrell Miller. Okay. And as you see here, he says that Eddie Hearn announced Wednesday. So it was several days before this article was written by Dan Rayfield. So it would have been, in April when Eddie Hearn announced it. It says that Hearn was looking for a replacement for 2 weeks for, obviously, Jarrell Miller, who failed a PED test. So that means that, in the first week of trying to find an opponent, the people he would have been contacted, he probably would have contacted multiple people. And the way it works is when you are potentially going to be a late replacement opponent, your manager contacts you straight away and says, get in the gym. You might be getting the AJ fight. Okay? So worst case scenario, Ortiz would have had 5 weeks to train. Is it ideal? No, but it's not the worst training camp, amount of time for a training camp. And at the end of the day, it's a career high payday for Luis Ortiz. Okay? What did Luis Ortiz do? Would have had 5 weeks to prepare. What did he do? Turned it down. He was offered $5 million. And these weirdos are still pushing this narrative that AJ somehow ducked Luis Ortiz. He offered him the fight. $5 million. And then Luis Ortiz asked for $7 million. And actually, Eddie Hearn improved the $5 million offer to $10 million. Ortiz asked for 10, but Eddie Hearn improved his offer. His final offer was $7 million. Okay. Ortiz turned it down. And I'll give you my view on why I think Ortiz turned it down in a moment. Says here, Ortiz only received 500 grand to face Deontay Wilder 13 months ago, but the 40-year-old and his team are seemingly looking for that big payday. Can you imagine? Your previous biggest payday was 500 grand against Wilder. You get offered $7 million to fight Anthony Joshua, and you turn it down. Absolutely shocking. All right. Andy Ruiz, of course, as we know, didn't turn it down. And for anyone who says, well, it was a terrible offer by, I don't know why they would, you know, they'd have to be insane to say it was a terrible offer from Team Joshua, and that 5 weeks isn't enough to train. I mean, it's amazing. Whenever Tyson Fury talked about the Andy Ruiz fight, he always said that Andy Ruiz took the fight on 2 weeks' notice. No, he didn't. He took the fight on just over a month's notice, a month and a few days. And he was just coming off a fight against Alexander Dimitrenko. Literally a week before he took the AJ fight, or a week and change, he had just fought Alexander Dimitrenko and had a whole training camp for that. So it was basically like one long training camp with maybe like a week or 10 days rest in between. So Tyson Fury was pushing those lies all those years. And so yeah, Ortiz, anyone who thinks it was a terrible offer, explain to me why after Eddie Hearn and AJ moved on and signed, and Andy Ruiz signed to fight AJ. Then Ortiz's manager came out, it says here, in shocking interview, and begged Anthony Joshua to please give them another opportunity. It says here, Luis Ortiz's manager, Jay Jimenez, has admitted his team effed up in negotiations with Anthony Joshua and begged for talks to be resumed. So if it was such a terrible offer, if it was so ridiculous, if it was such short notice, 5 weeks, then why did they come back begging for the fight again? You see, the narrative that was pushed during that time was such ridiculous propaganda, but it worked on so many people. They believed it. Casuals. Casuals who like to think of themselves as hardcores. They're not. They're casuals. They believed all this rubbish. PBC combined with Tyson Fury, top-ranked propaganda. That's all it ever was. And of course, here's Eddie Hearn saying, not only were you offered $7 million, but you tried to out us in the public eye, in the media. That's exactly what Ortiz and his team did. They tried to throw dirt on AJ and Hearn's name when they were being offered this money. Hearn continued, he said, to try and F our reputation and discredit us when you got offered $6 million and then $7 million for a fight. Now, my opinion on why Luis Ortiz turned the fight down, I don't think he was scared of Anthony Joshua or anything like that. And I suspect Ortiz himself initially would have wanted to take it. But what I think happened was he was dissuaded by somebody at PBC. And the reason they dissuaded him is because they wanted to reserve him for the Deontay Wilder rematch, which he ended up having, by the way, later on that same year. Because, you know, a promoter doesn't think like a fan. You see, a fan of Luis Ortiz or Wilder or Fury is going to think, yeah, Ortiz will knock AJ out. AJ's scared of him. That's how a fan would think. A promoter doesn't think like that. A promoter's thinking, okay, if we allow Ortiz to fight AJ on DAZN and AJ does a job on Ortiz, even if we think that our guy Ortiz might be a slight favorite against AJ, there's always the chance AJ does him in and does a better job on him than Wilder did in their first fight. Then we don't have an opponent for Wilder later on in the year. And we're supposed to be building Deontay ahead of his second fight with Tyson Fury. And Luis Ortiz is the perfect stepping stone for him, the perfect tool to help build his name up ahead of the Fury rematch. So I think he was dissuaded, Luis Ortiz that is, by people at PBC who, I'm just going to say, in my opinion, did not have his best interests at heart. The same way that Wilder himself was dissuaded from taking that DAZN deal by people who did not have his best interests at heart, but rather they had the best interests of Fox and Showtime at heart. Because remember, back then, DAZN were trying to get a foothold in the US market. And, you know, PBC didn't want to have their biggest fighters fighting on DAZN. They were looking out for the interests of their broadcasters. So that's why I think Luis Ortiz turned it down. I don't think he was afraid of, Anthony Joshua or anything like that, but I just think he got bad advice. Now, be that as it may, there are still people, regardless, who will say, well, Ortiz would have knocked AJ out, and who knows? Maybe he would have done, okay? Styles make fights at the end of the day. But what they don't seem to ever acknowledge is the fact, and it is a fact, that Anthony Joshua beat more proven fighters than Luis Ortiz anyway. Okay? And I'm not even talking about Andy Ruiz, who has a win over Ortiz. That was an older version of Ortiz. Never mind Andy Ruiz. I'm talking about the likes of Klitschko. I'm talking about the likes of Povetkin. I'm talking about the likes of Joseph Parker. All three of those guys are more proven and have better resumes than Luis Ortiz ever had. Now, at the time, I did a video where I compared the credentials of Vladimir Klitschko, Alexander Povetkin, and Luis Ortiz. Okay? Klitschko, at the time he fought AJ, 41, record of 64-4, Olympic gold medalist. He held 3 world titles, WBA, IBF, not when he fought AJ, but, previously, WBA, IBF, and he held the WBO twice. Had a total of 29 world title fights and beat 12 world champions. Joshua's record at the time when he fought Klitschko was 18-0, and I want you guys to remember this. 18-0 when he fought a man with these credentials. Alexander Povetkin at the time when he fought AJ, 39 years of age, a record of 34-1, just a one loss to Klitschko. Olympic gold medalist. Had the WBA world title. A total of 7 world title fights and beat 6 world champions. AJ's record at the time when he beat Povetkin was 21-0. Compare that to Luis Ortiz, 38 years of age when he fought Wilder, 31-1, 0 Olympic medals, 0 world titles held, only 1 world title fight. Okay, that was going into the rematch with Wilder, I believe. World champions beaten, 0. Wilder's record at the time, 41-0. So Wilder didn't fight Luis Ortiz. I can't remember now if it was 41-0 when Wilder had the rematch with Ortiz or the first fight, but there wasn't that many fights in between them. All right, so let's call it 39-0 if it was the first Luis Ortiz fight. So Wilder waited until he was 39-0, there or thereabouts, before he fought the best guy on his win column on his resume. Whereas AJ was fighting people with much better credentials than Ortiz when he was 18-0 and 21-0. And again, there's also Joseph Parker, who at the time was kind of, a little green, although he was a world champion, but he's gone on to achieve more in his career. So again, this idea that Ortiz was like the 3rd best heavyweight in the world is based on literally nothing. It's a myth. He's never done anything in a boxing ring. He's got no wins on his resume to show that he was ever better than Povetkin or Klitschko. Amateur or pro, by the way. Povetkin was the dominant super heavyweight on the amateur scene for years. That's a fact. Okay? When he turned pro, he did way more than Ortiz ever did. So how people are trying to say that, Ortiz was just so much better than anyone AJ was willing to fight, it's just a load of rubbish, man. It's just absolute rubbish. AJ fought and beat better people than Ortiz. So, people need to get a grip, man. Why they're still bringing this stuff up when AJ is done, finished, washed, is anyone's guess. But there you go. Just to show you how delusional these individuals are and push back a little bit because they are relentless on videos that have got nothing to do with Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua. They still want to come with their obsessive comments. These weird guys. Anyway, let me get to the chat here. All right, shout out to Rep for the super chat. He says, Hatman, what did you think about Vladimir Klitschko when he was an upcoming talent? I watched the fight he had with Ray Mercer. Crazy how much more explosive and exciting he was compared to later in his career. Yeah, he was a lot more explosive. he did take a lot more risks back then, and I'll get to the other super chats in just a second. He did take a lot more risks. And you could see why they thought he was the heir apparent. But of course, he ended up losing. His first loss was to Ross Purity. And, he gassed out in that fight. It's a fight he was winning. But Ross Purity was a very tough kind of fringe contender / journeyman who worked as a sparring partner for a lot of people, including Lennox Lewis. So he knew how to look after himself. And Vladimir Klitschko just, as I say, gassed out. He didn't pace himself well. And Ross Purity was able to get to him. It was one of those typical fights, like when a prospect goes in there against a vet who's just slightly too wily for him. Like when David Haye fought Carl Thompson, or when Josh Kelly fought David Avanesian, that kind of thing. You could sense at a certain point in that fight that this weren't going to end well for Vladimir Klitschko. So, he, even after the Purity defeat, was still somewhat aggressive. But then he ran into Corey Sanders. I mean, I remember when he knocked out, people like Francois Botha with a great left hook and all that kind of thing. But then he ran into Corey Sanders and got flattened and, came back after that. He was still somewhat aggressive after that, but a little less so. It was after the Lamont Brewster fight that he really changed his style up. And he was with Manny Stewart for the first Brewster fight. That's where Klitschko lost. He was with Manny Stewart then. But Manny Stewart hadn't really, gelled with Klitschko, and he hadn't really got to know him and got to change him in the way that he wanted to moving forward. But yeah, once he and Manny Stewart developed their bond and worked out a system, Vladimir Klitschko went on a long run. But of course, the system, in order to protect his chin, was a boring system. It wasn't entertaining. But as you say, earlier on in Vladimir's career, he was a much more exciting fighter to watch. So, thank you for the super chat. Laughs in the Abyss, thank you for your super chat. He says, is Tony Yoka the new George Michael of boxing? I looked up the claim about Tony Yoka that was made in the chat room the other day. About him swinging both ways, and I didn't see anything about it. So I don't know whether that guy was just trolling or, maybe it's on a French website somewhere, or I don't know, but make of that what you will. I haven't seen any articles or any stories relating to Tony Yoka's preference. Let's just put it that way. Shout out to Hero Protagonist for the super chat. Thank you very much, sir. Much appreciated. Shout out to Prav for your super chat. He says, to the realest boxing channel on YouTube by a mile. I've been listening to your channel for years, and both knowledge and humor are on another level. Much appreciated, sir. Thank you for the kind words. And thank you for the super chat, of course. All right, getting back to the live chat here. Yes, big up to I'm the Daddy. And by the way, before we get into a more general boxing chat here, I do want to... Indeed, Jimbo Jones, you make a good point. Shout out to Black Dynamite in the chat. AJ fought Klitschko at a time when Wilder could have fought him. At a time when Klitschko was looking for the Wilder fight. Yeah, Klitschko was aiming for the Wilder fight after he lost to Fury. And of course, when Klitschko was still champion, Wilder could have unified, but Wilder's manager, Shelley Finkel, came out in public and said, Wilder's just a baby. Literally, blatantly kept him away from Klitschko. Unbelievable. And at the time, again, Wilder had 35 fights or something like that? AJ fought Klitschko in his 18th fight. Honestly, this notion that AJ was always protected and Wilder somehow wasn't is the most ridiculous narrative that I've ever seen in boxing. A guy who is damn near 40 fights in, wouldn't fight Klitschko, didn't fight Joseph Parker, blatantly avoided his mandatory Dylan White for years, and then eventually takes on Ortiz when he's about 40-0. And Ortiz was about 40 years old. Unbelievable. There you go. That's boxing propaganda at its best, or its worst, depending on how you want to look at it. But yeah, before we move on to a more general boxing chat, a little bit of other news here. I've been quite surprised by how many people are really interested in this fight. Isaac Chamberlain and Vidal Riley clashing. Well, Isaac Chamberlain has pulled out with an injury, and presumably it will be postponed rather than cancelled, depending on whether Vidal Riley wants to move on or not. But yeah, these guys, actually no, I was going to say that these guys are both boxer fighters, but they're not, are they? Vidal Riley's a boxer fighter, but Isaac Chamberlain, isn't he still with Mick Hennessy? Or has that contract expired, or does Hennessy work in conjunction with Boxer to promote Isaac Chamberlain and his career? I'm not sure. But yeah, Isaac Chamberlain pulled out with an injury. We'll see if it gets rescheduled. My take on it the whole time is that Vidal Riley wins the fight comfortably. So yeah, I'm not quite sure why it's such a popular fight. I'm not saying, you're not supposed to like it, but I'm not quite sure why so many people are interested in it. Maybe it's the South London, East London rivalry. And that's another thing. Isaac Chamberlain is from Brixton, the same place I'm from. Yet, for me, it's not about, being biased in favor of my hometown guy. It's about just picking who I think is going to win. That's all. It's not about picking who I want to win or, because they're from where I'm from. No, who I think is going to win. And I think Vidal Riley, if the fight goes ahead, is going to win pretty comfortably on points. I don't think it's going to be a tough struggle for him, to be honest. I could be wrong. We'll find out. Isaac Chamberlain is a tough guy, but I just think Riley's going to be too fresh and too talented for him. And I think he'll outbox him. I think Vidal Riley, especially these days, has got much better movement than Isaac Chamberlain. He can really get around the ring, pops his jab. He's got nice combinations and fast hands. The only two areas where I'm a little unsure about Vidal Riley are his chin and his thirst for battle. Those things have yet to be answered, right? The questions about those things have yet to be answered. I'm not saying he's got a bad chin or he doesn't have a strong thirst for battle, but, in the Lawal fight, the Mikhail Lawal fight, I thought he boxed unnecessarily cautiously. He won without a shadow of a doubt, easily on the cards. But it was just a very, very cautious and negative performance against a very limited fighter in Mikhail Lawal. Yeah, he can punch, but he's very limited, that guy. So why Riley was so cautious and negative, I'm not quite sure. Isaac Chamberlain, of course, fought Mikhail Lawal, and he was far more aggressive. He actually stuck it on Lawal, and Lawal was the puncher. But when you're in there with a puncher who's that limited, you can do things like that. You can't stick it on a guy who's that limited. So, even though he can punch. So, yeah, a lot of people have been asking about that fight. It has been postponed. All right. So let's get into some general boxing chat here. Okay, we got another super chat here from Workstation. Shout out to you, sir. He said, I heard Vidal Riley is fighting Chev Clark on the Ben Eubank undercard. Though don't take my word for it. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. Because that's a fight that I've always wanted to see. I've been calling for that fight from very early on in their careers. And again, in that instance, I always felt as though Vidal Riley would beat Chev Clark. Chev Clark's strong. He's mentally tough, obviously. He can punch. But I always felt that Riley's movement and his speed and his overall talent would allow him to come out on top in that one. So, yeah, if it does happen, that's a actually better fight, in my opinion. A more interesting fight than Vidal Riley versus Isaac Chamberlain. Because Chamberlain doesn't have the kind of power that Chev Clark has. Clark has got power. And, and he's physically stronger, I think, than Isaac Chamberlain. So I would say Clark has got a better chance of beating Vidal Riley than Isaac Chamberlain would. Just my opinion. But yeah, thank you to Workstation for the super chat. Much appreciated. JA says, Has there ever been a Brixton versus Peckham boxing rivalry? I'm sure there has. But not with any like major fighters. With more like domestic level fighters, yeah, but not any major fighters that I can think of. Not any major ones. Shout out to, is it Klinkle? Shout out to Klinkle. Shout out to RF. Rex. Dominic says no proper boxers from Peckham. Khalid says it probably has happened at a York Hall show in the past. Yeah, I'm sure it has. G-Man says, I still think Vidal is very crude, never been impressed. I've been quite impressed by Vidal, to be honest. I think that he's got very good movement. I think he puts his punches together well. I think he's got good coordination and balance. I don't know how far he can go, but on the domestic scene, as far as the upcoming cruiserweights, to me, he was always the most talented. I've always seen him as like more talented than Chamberlain, more talented than what's the name now? Chev Clark, more talented than even someone like Chris Billum-Smith. Now, of course, just because you're more talented than certain people, it doesn't necessarily mean you can beat them, because boxing is more, being successful at boxing is more than just about talent. Some fighters have the talent. I mean, for example, Joseph Parker is more talented than Dylan White, but Dylan White still beat him. So, yeah, but no, I think Rowley has talent. Shout out to Sean McNally. He says, yo, Minnesota checking in. Who do you got winning the Benavidez-Morrell fight? I'm kind of leaning towards Benavidez. Yeah, I'm leaning towards Benavidez. Both guys have fought at 175 now, and neither guy really shined at 175, but I think Benavidez looked a bit better than Morrell. Morrell really didn't look good in his 175 debut, and he struggled. And it was an awkward, difficult style, yeah, but if he found that awkward and difficult, I think Benavidez is going to be even more awkward and difficult. So I got Benavidez probably on the cards, on points. Sean McNally says, yep, same here, but Morrell is our hometown boy. Cuban, but yeah. Shout out to the Cubans. But I got to lean towards Benavidez based on recent form. Okay, somebody says, what about the rumor that Bacoli dropped Usyk in sparring? Is that true? Well, none of us were there, so we can't know for sure, but I suspect it is true. I suspect it is. Shout out to Jay. He says, what's up from Australia? Shout out to B Lion. G-Man says, has Vidal Riley ever followed up on Fury versus Usyk 2? He was so pro-Fury first time. I think he was sure Fury would win the rematch. Yes, he was. Vidal Riley was totally smitten by Tyson Fury before both fights. After the first fight, Riley was absolutely certain that Tyson Fury was going to win the rematch. He said, Usyk can never replicate that performance again. He boxed out of his skin and he raised his game to a level he'll never be able to raise it again. Vidal Riley clearly doesn't understand or know Alexander Usyk. Doesn't understand what kind of character he is. And, when you see Tyson Fury face planting outside of a pub a couple of weeks after the fight, I mean, does that look like a guy who's going to be able to raise his level and raise his game. Like, come on. The guy, and of course, Fury took more punishment in the first fight than Usyk did. So why Riley thought that, Usyk would never be able to raise his game to that level, but Fury would be able to raise his game more, I always found that to be a very strange take. Raw Holcomb says, when are you coming back to Brixton? I work there, so would like to meet you. I have no plans to return to the UK, much less Brixton anytime soon. So shout out to you, but don't hold your breath. Big up James Clifford for the super chat. He says, Hatman, back in the days, if Tim Witherspoon had beaten Bone Crusher Smith, then went on to Mike Tyson, how do you think that fight would have gone? Good question. Interesting one. Somebody says Fury Chisora 4 confirmed. I know he's trolling, surely. It's an interesting question. Tim Witherspoon was very talented, despite the fact he had a very limited amateur background. He turned pro and fought Larry Holmes early on in his career and gave a good account of himself. So he obviously had a lot of natural ability. And how would have he fared against Mike Tyson? I want to say he might have given Tyson a decent go, but ultimately I do think Tyson at that time, when I think about the styles, because Tim Witherspoon wasn't that difficult to hit. He could be a little slick with his defense and, this and that, but he wasn't a fleet-footed fighter. He was a guy that was going to stand right there with you. Obviously, Holyfield stood with Tyson and he beat him from the inside out. But I don't think Witherspoon's counterpunching was as sharp as Holyfield. And I don't think he was quite as adept on the inside. So I would have taken Mike Tyson to win the fight. Maybe it would have been a little interesting if Witherspoon managed to get into the second half of the fight and wasn't too damaged. But Mike Tyson at that time had so much energy and speed and what have you. I don't think Witherspoon quite would have had the tools to deal with him. That's just my opinion off the top of my head. But shout out to you for the super chat. James Clifford every time. Much appreciated. Raw Holcomb says, Brixton is posh now. All middle-class hipsters. Yeah, Brixton is heavily gentrified now. I mean, there's still some rough things that go on there, but it's outside of the center of Brixton. It's on the council estates in the surrounding area, right? Still in Brixton, but outside of the center. Whereas back in the days, the center of Brixton was one of the roughest parts. I mean, all sorts of stuff was happening on Brixton High Road, Acre Lane, Cold Arbor Lane, all around there, all through the market, Electric Avenue. There was stuff popping off all the time, even in broad day. So the center of Brixton, when I was growing up, was dangerous, very dangerous. Whereas now, it's all gentrified, hipsters are moving in. It's like the new Clapham Junction almost, for the hipsters to go and have their little drink ups and have their tapas and whatever the case may be. There was Pop Brixton, which was, when I went there, quite a nice place to go. Pop Brixton, it's kind of like a box park, but with more character. Because box park is very sterile, isn't it? Whereas Pop Brixton has got some character to it, and it's actually quite a nice little location there, which was right next to Brixton Recreation Centre. But yeah, it's all gentrified now. Shout out to Brad for the super chat. He says, I often hear you say that you feel Tyson Fury is mentally tougher than Joshua. How much of that you think is based on a foundation of delusion? That's a good question. You see, this is something that Chris Eubank Sr. talked about. He said, in boxing, in order to be successful, you have to be delusional. I don't know whether you necessarily need to use the word delusional, but you certainly have to be extremely confident. You certainly have to have a lot of self-belief. You certainly have to have, and I think this is more accurate, you have to have a big ego to be successful in boxing. I've spoken about this in many videos many times. Some people seem to think that certain fighters are totally humble and they've got no ego at all. That's just simply not true. All the best fighters have got a big ego. They might not verbalize their egotism. They might control their behavior when they're among fans and all that type of stuff and confine it to their boxing, right? And even when they're boxing, they might not come out trash talking, but I'm talking about the way their mind works and the way they think about themselves as a fighter in relation to, in comparison to their contemporaries, their rivals. Every top fighter thinks that they are the dogs, you know what. They think they're the bee's knees, okay? Their ego is big for their boxing ability. And I don't think AJ's ego has ever been big enough to make it at the top level in boxing over the long haul. Yeah. I mean, not that I ever believed the whole stay humble thing. Okay. AJ's not humble like some kind of, I don't know. Is a monk humble? Let's say a monk. AJ's not humble like that. But I would say he's more humble than a Tyson Fury. Yeah, he's more humble than Fury. Fury being more egotistical gave him an advantage over Anthony Joshua psychologically. That's what I would say. So, rather than delusional, and I think I might have described it that way myself in the past, is you have to be delusional to a certain extent. But I think a more accurate way to describe it is just to say egotistical. Yeah, a fighter has to have a big ego. That's what gives you the confidence. When you're in a tough situation in a fight and, you've been knocked down, you've been hurt, you need your ego because that's what's going to tell you, to hell with this guy. I'm not going to let him do this to me. I remember George Foreman in the documentary Champions Are Forever. If you haven't seen that documentary, I think it's still up on YouTube. It's a must watch. Champions Are Forever is about the Muhammad Ali era from the 1960s through the 1970s. And they show clips of many of the most important fights of that era involving George Foreman, Joe Frazier, Ken Norton, Muhammad Ali, and so on. And they have the talking heads, so the fighters themselves are talking, and then they play a clip and whatever. And at the end, they've got like a dinner with Ali, Foreman, Frazier, Ken Norton, and so on. So it's an absolute must watch. But anyway, during the documentary, George Foreman is talking about the Rumble in the Jungle, and they're playing the Rumble in the Jungle, and then they're kind of intersplicing it with clips of George Foreman describing the fight, as well as Muhammad Ali describing the fight and what he was thinking and feeling. And George Foreman said there was a moment in his fight against Ali early on, in the first, 2 or 3 rounds, where he had Ali pinned on the ropes and he hit him so hard in the chest. He said it's like he dehumanized him. He turned Ali into a piece of meat in front of him. And he said he hit him so hard. And normally when he hits somebody like that, he sees the fear of God in their eyes, right? He sees they freeze up and they're totally intimidated because the shot was so hard, they don't want to get hit on the chin with that shot. Do you know what I mean? But he said with Ali looked at him with an angry face, with a fury on his face after he got hit with that shot. And Foreman said that it was as if Ali was saying to him, I'm not going to take that from you. That's what I'm talking about when I say ego. Ali's ego was so big that he wasn't going to take a shot like that and be afraid and crumble. He was going to say, who the hell do you think you are? I'm not going to take that from you. You see? That is what AJ lacks. His ego ain't big enough. Yeah. Never mind about the punch resistance and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of fighters that don't have great punch resistance, but if they've got the ego to compensate for it, they'll find a way around the lack of punch resistance. and so on, to remain confident and remain defiant in a fight. But yeah, thank you for your super chat and very good question. Shout out to Brad. Realities Awakened says, Hatman, AJ against Kevin Johnson was his best version, raw, mentally strong, and a real killer in the ring. Do you agree? Well, I think that AJ was more egotistical, going back to the ego thing. In his early days, in the pre-Klitschko days, or maybe up until the Klitschko fight, he was more egotistical. He used to fight more arrogantly and all that kind of thing. But, yeah, at some point he was pushing all the stay humble stuff, and maybe he started to believe it. Maybe he started to think that you need to be humble in this boxing game. No, you don't. You can act humble, but you shouldn't actually be humble. This is something I've talked about on Patreon many times. This idea that you need to kill your ego. I mean, it drives me up the wall when I hear people say that. If you're any kind of fighter, that is the worst thing you can do, is kill your ego. You need your ego. Workstation says, Muhammad Ali, he's quoting Ali, it says, look at you round 7 and you're tired. You have 8 more rounds to go. Yeah, he said, Ali said that he noticed Foreman was tired after, 5 or 6 rounds. And he looked at him and he was like, boy, this is the wrong place to get tired. Indeed, it is the wrong place to get tired. When you're in there with man like Muhammad Ali, yeah, you don't want to be getting tired. Ali wasn't a particularly big puncher, but he was vicious. Ali was a vicious, never mind Ali's jokes and banter and his clowning around. In the ring, he was a vicious man. Very, very spiteful. I mean, just go and have a look at the Ernie Terrell fight if you want to see how spiteful Muhammad Ali was in the ring. He was very, very spiteful. GV says, I think Joshua's character is not life and soul of the party. I wouldn't say shy, but he's not a big talker. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. He's got a robotic personality. Okay, Orca says, people also don't realize that while, yes, Foreman did have Ali on the ropes and hitting him hard, Ali also countered back twice as much. He wasn't a punching bag. He was a cornered animal. Well, in certain rounds, he actually was a punching bag. I think it might have been 6 or 7. Yeah. He was a punching bag in that round. Suida says, be humble, be cocky, nonsense, just be yourself. Fighters need to be confident, but it's no excuse to be acting like a bully and POS. Well, I'm not saying that you need to act like a bully, because, as I explained before, there are many fighters who, again, top-level fighters who have a massive ego, but they don't externalize it. So they don't do all the trash talking and all that kind of stuff. It's what you think of yourself in your mind. Yeah, a lot of the Eastern European fighters have massive egos, the same as Western fighters do. But because of the way the Eastern European culture is different, they contain their egotistical thoughts. They keep their egotistical thoughts to themselves. I mean, you look at Artur Beterbiev. You guys don't think he's egotistical? He's definitely egotistical, but he's not going to verbalize it and express it the way a lot of Western fighters would. Yeah, because they have this stoicism thing going on with a lot of the Eastern European countries. They're like stoic, so they kind of contain their ego more. But it's in there, trust me. They're very egotistical. They believe they are amazing and, supreme fighters. But, yeah, and again, the ego is something that you need in many endeavors in life. You need your ego. You certainly don't want to kill it. That's insane. What you do need to do is control it. Because if an ego gets out of control, then you can become a terrible person to be around. People will start to not like you, and you can find yourself in a great deal of trouble if you do not control your ego. So an ego needs to be controlled, but it certainly should never be killed. That's, the worst advice I've ever heard in my life is people who say you need to kill your ego. First Round Boxing says, Mike Tyson was before my time. The most intimidating fighters of my lifetime, I think, are Golovkin and Luis Ortiz for a brief period. Only ones I recall in the past 10 years with that type of aura. Yeah, neither of those guys, as somebody who lived through the Mike Tyson era, I can tell you that neither of those guys had even a tenth of the intimidation factor and the aura of a prime Mike Tyson. I've never seen anything like a prime Mike Tyson before or since in terms of his aura of invincibility, the intimidation factor, and no disrespect. I don't mean this in a disrespectful way at all, but the hype. People literally thought that Mike Tyson was invincible in any form of hand-to-hand combat. There were loads of people who felt that, right? Now, as kids growing up, there were friends of mine who said ridiculous things because, kids, I'm talking about when we were not even teenagers yet. Kids don't understand that movie stars like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jean-Claude Van Damme can't actually fight. Well, Jean-Claude Van Damme could fight a bit in real life, but Arnold Schwarzenegger can't fight. Okay. But I remember conversations when I was a kid with my friends who would win in a fight between Mike Tyson and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And some of them were saying Arnold Schwarzenegger would win. Who's the toughest guy in the world, the baddest man on the planet? And certain guys were saying Schwarzenegger. I was like, you mad? He's not a fighter, he's an actor. But yeah, there were loads of people. Vinnie Jones was one of them. The ex-football player who turned actor himself. I remember after Mike Tyson came out of prison and resumed his career, Vinnie Jones said that Mike Tyson is the hardest man on the planet. It might have actually been in the run-up to the first Holyfield fight. He said that Mike Tyson was the hardest man on the planet. And that was a very common opinion for people to have. I've never seen that with any other fighter in my life. Loads of people to say that he's invincible in any kind of hand-to-hand combat. Shout out to Rep for the super chat. He says, I'd love to see you do a full psychological deep dive on Usyk. A few years ago, we all thought Fury had one of the best mentalities in boxing, but he was nothing compared to Usyk's own mindset. Yes, the problem with doing a deep dive on Usyk's mentality is that he doesn't speak great English, and you need to, you can go off a guy's behavior, and you can go off a guy's, body language and all that kind of stuff, but to really go, to go as deep as you possibly can, pause, you need to listen to the stuff that they say. And with Usyk, he doesn't speak that great English, and so sometimes he'll use words that are, not especially appropriate for what he's trying to say, if you get my meaning. So that's one of the things that makes it a little more difficult with a guy like Alexander Usyk, is, the lack of English. But yeah, he's obviously got a very hardcore mentality. And I say that based upon the people that have been around him. The way that he trains is maniacal. And he's a guy that's addicted to training. And one thing I have always deduced from Usyk is that, being a smaller fighter, taking on big guys, and being so successful doing it, from the amateurs, WSB in particular, through the pros, sparring Klitschko and all that kind of stuff. He had to have a certain amount of resolve to be successful fighting big guys for as long as he was. He had to. And that's why when some people were trying to compare Usyk to Klitschko in terms of their mentalities in the run-up to the first Fury fight, I was like, no way. Usyk's mentality is totally different to Klitschko, because Klitschko always had a physical advantage over pretty much everybody he ever stepped in the ring with. And because he always had physical advantages over them, he never had to develop a really tough interior. Whereas Usyk was a smaller man for so many years than his opponents. So he had to develop this tough interior. You know, it's like Evander Holyfield, similar thing. He was fighting bigger, stronger guys from the amateurs, so he had to develop an iron will and an iron resolve, yeah, to be able to overcome the physical advantages that his opponents had. So, yeah, Usyk's always had that, and this obsessive mentality when it comes to training. He's meticulous. A lot of that is a cultural thing, though, as well. A lot of those old Eastern Bloc guys from the old Soviet amateur system, it's carried through into the pros. That type of mentality for a lot of them. And maybe that culture still exists in the, in Eastern European countries now, where they're more hardcore when it comes to the discipline, not partying and all that kind of stuff, at least not much. And that's a common thing you see with most of the Eastern European fighters. Not all of them, but the majority of them are more disciplined from what I've seen than Western fighters are. Just think about them, from Alexander Gvozdyk, Dmitry Bivol, Artur Beterbiev, Vasyl Lomachenko, Alexander Usyk, the Klitschkos even. Think about these fighters compared to Western fighters who are always blowing up in weight, between fights, falling out of pubs drunk, coke scandals, all this. For the most part, you don't see Eastern European fighters getting involved in that kind of activity, with the exception of maybe Sergey Kovalev. Yeah, he was always a wrong'un, but with most of them, it's a cultural thing. They're very, they're more disciplined than our guys are, for the most part. But shout out to Rap again for the super chat. Shout out to Mr. Luca. He says, in your opinion, what fight should Turkey make? What fights would I like Turkey to make? I'd like him to make Daniel Dubois versus Martin Bakole. If Martin Bakole gets past the Jagba and Dubois gets past Parker, that's the fight I'd like to see him make. Now, Bakole would be mandatory for Dubois anyway, but Frank Warren, of course, if he's as concerned about Bakole fighting his man Dubois as I think he is, he might try and put roadblocks in the way. Things can always be done. Frank Warren is a wily old vet in the game, so he can find a way to sabotage or delay the fight. And in fact, he was talking about that kind of thing. You guys may remember, after the AJ fight, he was claiming that AJ was Dubois' mandatory challenger, and he never was. So he was retrospectively trying to, influence the IBF or convince the IBF that AJ should have counted as a mandatory challenger. Why on earth would he do that? I can only imagine it's because he wants to delay the Martin Bakole fight. Suida says, okay, he's talking about the Pulev scandal. Well, again, that's kind of a cultural thing, right? In Bulgaria, it's not as much of like a, woke feminist country, is it, Bulgaria, as the United States is at this stage. So the kind of behavior that is seen as lighthearted and harmless in Bulgaria between men and women, especially women, I don't know. You know what I'm getting at. It might have been seen as appropriate in Bulgaria, but in a country like the United States, in America in particular, they've got a suing culture which has been around for many decades, where they're real quick to sue you over the slightest thing or bring charges so that they can get some money out of you and a payout and whatever. I don't necessarily think that that was an example of a lack of discipline. I just think it was more of like a culture clash, right? Shout out to Straight Outta Boscombe. One second here, folks. Okay, shout out to Devin. Shout out to First Round Boxing. He says, Ortiz is a meme now, but for a brief period he was feared. Yeah, I don't really agree with that. I don't think there was ever a period where fighters really feared, or many fighters really feared Luis Ortiz. I've never really bought that. I think it was an Al Heyman concoction. Somebody saying I missed Mr. Lucas Super Chat. No, I didn't. I addressed it. He said, "What, in your opinion, what fight should Turkey make?" And I said, I'd like to see him make Daniel Dubois versus Martin Bakole. Yeah, Daniel Dubois versus Martin Bakole. I'd love to see that fight. Reality's Awakened now, says Hatman. How impressed are you by Mayweather's resume, beating 16 world champions like Canelo, Pacquiao, Cotto, Mosley, etc.? Who has a better resume? Loads of people have better resumes than Floyd Mayweather. Most of the names that you read out, I mean, there's an asterisk next to pretty much all of them. So Canelo, weight drained and green at the time. Pacquiao, way past his best. Miguel Cotto, weight drained. Actually, no. Was Miguel Cotto? No, it wasn't. Excuse me. That was when Cotto fought Pacquiao. He was weight drained against Pacquiao. Cotto was kind of past his best. That fight was at 154, Mayweather against Cotto. But I guess that was a decent win. Mosley was way past it when he fought Mayweather. So Mayweather has got a lot of big names on his resume, but not many big names where it's a guy in his prime who was, at the top of his game, and he's either, not weight drained or whatever the case may be. There's not that many of those names at welterweight for Mayweather. In the lower weight classes, that's when Mayweather actually did most of his best work. When he was beating people like Diego Corrales, Castillo in the rematch. The first fight was, some people believe controversial, but when he was beating guys in those weight classes, super featherweight, lightweight, didn't stay at 140 for very long. But yeah, that's where he did his best work, where he was fighting prime fighters. Once he stepped up to 147, it got a little dicey. Yeah, it got a little dicey. There was plenty of guys he could have fought from, he could have fought Shane Mosley earlier on in his career, at a lower weight class. But the likes of Paul Williams, Antonio Margarito, Vernon Forrest, Winky Wright, who was at 154, but, Mayweather fought at that division as well. And several other fighters who Mayweather could have fought but didn't. Always had some type of reason or excuse not to take these guys on. And don't get it twisted, Mayweather was a great fighter, a great fighter. But his resume, when you inspect it, is not as strong as it appears at first glance when you take into account the stage that many of those fighters were actually at during their careers. As Workstation said there, yeah, Mayweather was opportunistic. He was opportunistic. And he did that whole thing of, I'm going to retire now. the fake retirements, because he wanted to sit back and allow the division to beat itself up. And then he would come out of retirement for one fight against somebody who he's been studying for a long time, who he thinks he's got the beating of. And then after beating him, he goes back into retirement. I mean, that's not the way that the great champions of old conducted themselves. They weren't trying to run away from, sitting on the throne and taking on all comers. But Mayweather did. He did. He would be on the throne, then he's off the throne. Then he's on the throne, then he's off the throne, So he doesn't have the responsibility of having to fight mandatories and all that kind of thing. So as great as he was, and he was great defensive fighter, sharp, underrated power, he was very well managed throughout his career. At the same time as being a great fighter, he was very well managed. Bexy says Glenn McCrory was sacked for a woke comment to a female waiter, or do you mean politically or anti-woke comment to a female waiter? Yeah, I don't think that's the reason that Glenn McCrory was sacked. Glenn McCrory, I don't know whether he still has, but he had a drinking problem. And just go look up Glenn McCrory getting into trouble with the law over being drunk and disorderly and what have you. And from what I hear, he was sometimes turning up to work late or not turning up at all, and issues with him drinking. And Adam Smith, actually, from what I've heard, again, this is all hearsay. I can't tell you that any of this particular stuff is true. The stuff with Glenn McCrory getting in trouble, being drunk in public and stuff he was doing, that's true. That's all well documented. Yeah. But in terms of what was going on at Sky, it's just rumors. Okay. So I just want to say that right up front. But rumors were Glenn McCrory's drinking was interfering with his job at Sky. So I don't think it was just about making one, bad comment. I think it was like a pattern of behavior over a long period of time with Glenn McCrory. He was a good pundit, a good commentator, but, if you got a drinking issue, there's only so long you're going to be able to hold down a job, right? If you got a drinking issue. Shout out to Realities Awakened. Shout out to Paul McAllister. The fat lad said the guy's retired. Why are you still making vids all the time about him? Well, first of all, it's because of his fans who keep on turning up to my videos that have nothing to do with Tyson Fury and talking about him. So that's one of the reasons. And for two, I don't believe he's retired at all. I think if you believe that Tyson Fury is genuinely retired, I got some seafront property to sell you in Birmingham if you're interested. So the idea that he's retired, I think, is laughable. How many times has this guy retired in the past? His retirements don't mean anything. Paul McAllister said, it is kind of unfair that Glenn got the boot from Sky when Carragher spat at a kid yet was forgiven. Yeah, but again, as I understand it, it was because of Glenn McCrory's drinking. It wasn't because of just one comment he made or one incident. It was like a long history of him having an issue with booze and that affecting his work. And so maybe the comments he made were like the final straw. Shout out to Rep again for the super chat. He says, back in the day, did you realize the mid-late 2000s were going to be a terrible era for heavyweight boxing, or did you have high hopes after Lewis retired? That's a good question. It's obviously a long time ago. We're talking about over 20 years. So I have to really ponder for a moment and see if I can remember what I was actually thinking at the time. I actually drifted away from boxing for a little bit. I mean, I was still, following it, but not as keenly after Lennox Lewis retired and Roy Jones got beat. I wasn't following it as keenly after that as I was during the 90s. And there weren't really any stars emerging, certainly not in the Anglo sphere. Not stars that, like a Mike Tyson, Holyfield, those kind of guys, Roy Jones, even James Toney. They weren't really those kind of stars. So I was getting on with my life. I wasn't really thinking about, is this era going to be as exciting as the previous era? I just kind of drifted away from boxing for a little bit, in terms of watching it. I became a little disinterested. But then around 2010, because of, circumstances in my life allowed for me to concentrate more on boxing, watching boxing and following boxing again. And so around 2010, I started my first YouTube channel and began talking about what was going on. And that was during the Klitschko era when it was very dead. Yeah. But there was domestic heavyweight rivalries going on, which I was speaking about. There was David Haye's career, so on and so forth. So yeah, around that time, 2010 is when I reignited my interest in boxing after a little bit of a hiatus, not being quite as engaged. I was watching boxing here and there during that time, obviously, because, the lighter weights with Mayweather and Pacquiao and Oscar De La Hoya and all that type of stuff, they were still doing their thing. Paul McAllister says, who is the worst pundit commentator in your opinion? I absolutely detest Merchant. I like Larry Merchant, to be honest. I liked him when he was on HBO during his prime, if you can call it that, right? When he was still able to string sentences together. I liked him. Yes, he could be rude and crass and insensitive towards fighters, especially when he was interviewing them. But I found him to be a very good analyst, and he had a good way with words. He was very observant. And of all the boxing pundits who have never boxed, I thought that Larry Merchant understood boxing and what boxers feel in the ring better than most. Yeah, it's not that common for a pundit, somebody who's never laced up a pair of gloves in their lives, to have such an insight into the way a fighter's mind works and the way that they feel. So I actually liked Larry Merchant. Least favorite would be some of the guys around now. Darren Barker. Again, nothing against him as a person, but I just think as a commentator, he's horrible. Just horrible. Mike Costello, I think he's horrible. Who else have they got? Commentator-wise. Costello, he's definitely one of them. And as I say, Darren Barker. Some people are saying Todd Grisham. I don't mind Todd Grisham, Yeah, Jim Rosenthal was a good commentator. I like Jim Rosenthal both as a commentator and as the lead presenter for boxing shows. He was good on ITV, Jim Rosenthal, back in the days. Liked him. And actually, there's another fighter another commentator I don't like, although he is or was a fighter, and that is Sonny Edwards. Now, it's not so much to do with the stuff that he says, it's just his voice. Sonny Edwards has got such a little pipsqueak voice, it just irritates me somehow. Again, his breakdowns of boxing are quite good, but yeah, his voice just irritates me. It's too much of a pipsqueak. G-Man says it's strange why no broadcaster now is a Harold Letterman scorer. He had his style he liked, but he could score pretty accurately. The Zone having Bellew score. Yeah, the Zone having Bellew score is crazy. But Harold Letterman, the iconic, okay, Jim, whenever they ask for his scorecard. And people used to print t-shirts with OK Jim on the front and walk around Las Vegas. Everybody knew what it meant. Muro's man says Merchant was tremendous. The whole HBO panel was tremendous. Yeah, they were very good on HBO with the boxing team. Shout out to Workstation again for the super chat. He says Todd Grisham has an interesting commentary career. First WWE, then Glory Knockout. Glory Kickboxing, now boxing, and Misfits boxing. Yeah, he's got a good voice, Todd Grisham. And that's one of the things which, in my view, is missing with British commentary. They don't seem to select commentators for their broadcast voice as much as I think that they should. Yeah, they're just bringing in people who are friendly with the executives or whatever, or with the promoter, the lead promoter, with the broadcaster, and it's like a nepotism type thing why they get the gig. That's what it seems to be when it comes to UK commentary teams. Whereas in America, I think the process is more rigorous in terms of selecting who's going to be a commentator. And one of the things that they want is somebody with a good commentary voice. Now, of course, they did have fighters and trainers and whatever who, now I'm talking about HBO specifically and Showtime. PBC, they weren't as good with the commentators. They weren't quite as rigorous with their selection process. But Showtime and HBO in particular, it seemed were. Because you think about the voices. Jim Lampley had a great broadcast voice. He was a trained broadcaster, right? Max Kellerman, even. I wasn't really a big fan of Kellerman in terms of his attitude, especially away from his professional capacity. If ever you see him in interviews, he always comes across as a donut. But he had a great broadcast voice. Max Kellerman definitely had a great broadcast voice. Great presence on the microphone. And, Larry Merchant, his broadcast voice wasn't as strong, but he added a different dimension to things. He'd always come out with his metaphors and this, that, and the other. So I thought the HBO team, like you, I thought they were tremendous. And Roy Jones was good as a commentator on HBO. His laugh was always iconic. His laugh added something to the mix of the commentary team. Usually after Larry Merchant or Jim Lampley would say something, Roy Jones would laugh for the audience, because the other guys generally didn't laugh that much, but Roy Jones would laugh at some of the stuff, the sarcastic stuff that Larry Merchant would say. Carlton Palmer says Lennox is terrible. I agree. Lennox Lewis was a horrible commentator. Never liked him on there. I thought Manny Stewart was good. Manny Stewart used to get so emotional watching the fights. I thought he was very good. Carlton Palmer says, I like Sonny, very knowledgeable. Yeah, I'm not doubting his knowledge. Sonny is knowledgeable. The only thing I don't like is just his voice. He's got a squeaky little voice. Anthony Hayweather says, Hatman, who's the biggest what if in boxing history? God, I would hesitate to say the biggest what if in boxing history, but some of the biggest what ifs in my lifetime would be Ike Ibeabuchi, for sure. He's definitely one of the biggest what ifs in my lifetime. I mean, some people would say that Mike Tyson is a what if. What if Cus D'Amato hadn't died? What if Jim Jacobs hadn't died? What if he'd stayed with Kevin Rooney? But me personally, I'm not really sold on that idea. Because people ask the question, what if, but then answer it by saying he would have been undefeated 100-0 if Cus hadn't died and if he'd stayed with Rooney. Yeah, I don't buy that. Shout out to Star Fox. Paul McAllister says, what's a memorable, funny commentary moment? People will never forget when Adam Smith clarifying that Bellew's tattoo wasn't connected to the Manchester Arena. Yeah, that was one of the most ridiculous things. I mean, Adam Smith has said some stupid stuff, you know, with his virtue signaling and, oh God, awful when he was with Sky. Some of the nonsense he used to come out with. That was the one that topped them all. As if that was a necessary thing to say. Totally ridiculous. So yeah, that was definitely up there in terms of farcical and therefore funny. But I want to say Steve Holdsworth on so many occasions. I've lost count of how many fights I watched where Steve Holdsworth was the commentator on Eurosport, and he literally had me rolling around laughing. Because he would, you know, trash talk the fighters and come out of all this sarcasm and funny jokes during the fight so casually. And I didn't mind him doing it because, one, he used to be a fighter himself, and sometimes he would joke about his own fighting career, you know? There was one time when he was actually commentating on one of the Olympics. I can't remember which Olympics it was. But there was another guy who was a younger guy, you know, another British guy, commentating with him. And the banter that they both had on that during that Olympics was crazy. I mean, it was like lads banter that was so near the knuckle, it would never be allowed on any major broadcaster today, certainly not in Britain. The lads banter was hilarious. I'll always remember that. Shout out to Liam in Chains. To answer your question, I stay away from them. Yeah, I stay away from them as best I can. When you have to talk to them, if you're going to a shop or you're going to wherever, some public place, I keep interactions to a minimum and select the people within my circle very, very carefully. So you're the type of people you're talking about. I keep them at a distance. I keep them at arm's length, even family members. When they're like that, when they're that far gone, and they have such a low level of sentience, I keep them at arm's length. Carlton Palmer says, Paulie is a good commentator, but his dodgy views outside of boxing means he's not getting work on any of the main networks. I'm not aware of him having any dodgy views. I mean, I don't follow him as closely as maybe other people do, but I'm not aware of his dodgy views. I mean, the reason he was sacked from Showtime was ridiculous. Literally ridiculous. That's like that woke insanity when he was sacked from Showtime. Terrible. I mean, all he said about, that got him sacked from Showtime is he was talking about how different ethnicities have had their time in boxing and particularly in the heavyweight division to be like dominant over other ethnicities. That got him sacked from Showtime. And I think a lot of it had to do with Deontay Wilder as well, because Malignaggi was being too objective. Yeah, he wasn't being pro-Wilder enough. And so that combined with the very mild comments and observations he made caused him to get sacked. Ridiculous. Linkage says he said something about Obama. Okay, what did he say about Obama? I can't think of too many good things to say about Obama, to be honest with you. Obama's got a good speaking voice. That might be the only good thing I got to say about him. And funny enough, Obama's speaking voice is very similar to The Rock, like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's voice. Very similar voices. Carlton Palmer says, yeah, I think he said a few more controversial things than that. Oh, that's news to me, because I haven't heard any more than that, really. I haven't heard him say anything, like, terrible that would necessitate him getting sacked. Star Fox says George Floyd. What, is he not allowed an opinion on George Floyd? Is there only one opinion allowed on him? Okay, Fight Sport Talks says apparently he went back and forth with his fans on Twitter about George Floyd. But I swear that was after he got fired. He got fired before that incident. So he was already out of Showtime by then. As far as I can remember. You guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I swear he was already gone from Showtime by then. Linkage says, he said, Obama being president means racism doesn't exist. Well, that is ridiculous. If he said that, and I don't know whether he did, I'm, going off what you're saying. If he said that, that is obviously ridiculous. Racism will always exist as long as different races exist. And some people have got a very weird definition of it. If you look it up in a dictionary, it is simply the belief that one race is superior to another. That's all it is. Some people have this idea that you can only call it that, right? I don't want to use the word too many times here because of the algorithm. You might think that this is not a boxing stream, right? But you can only call it that, the R word, if it's a group of people that have power over another group of people. No, that's a load of nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Yeah. What they're talking about is institutionalized R word. Yeah, that's a particular form of the R word. Yeah. But just the standard definition is just to believe that one race is superior to another. And by that standard definition, well, you'd have to say that the majority of human beings of all races, and the majority just is more than 50%, the majority of human beings of all races are to some extent racist, right? Because the majority of human beings, I have to imagine, think that their race is superior to some other race in the world. So yeah, the idea that racism doesn't exist is ridiculous. Of course it exists. It will always exist. Paul McAllister says, is Yusuf Mack still starring with the dog pound? I don't even want to think about that guy. Oh, dear, oh dear, that Yusuf Mack guy. Yeah, let's not even go there. Paul McAllister says, shooting a new movie with Tony Yoka. You know, it's such a weird world. It wouldn't shock me if something like that actually happened. Tony Yoka, Yusuf Mack, and Kelly Maloney. How's that for nightmare fuel? And some people are asking what happened to Tony Yoka. Well, there was someone in here in the chat room the other day claiming that Tony Yoka had come out as bi. I've got no idea whether it's true. I haven't been able to find any articles talking about it or tweets talking about it. It could just be somebody trolling, but that's what they were claiming. They were claiming that Tony Yoka came out as bi. So I don't know. Same Hussein says, Hatman, I'm eating. Oh dear. Kelly Maloney, aka Frank Maloney. Shout out to Suited and Booted. He says, why do boxers get so much hate from armchair casuals who can only dream of ever stepping in that ring? Great content and long-time subscriber. Depends what you mean by hate. You know, depends what you mean by hate. Because as consumers of boxing, the same as consumers of anything, you have a right to critique the product. Because at the end of the day, especially if you're somebody that buys the pay-per-views, subscribes and all that kind of stuff, you've got a right to critique the product, right? You've got a right to make demands and you've got a right to talk about the fighters' antics and the way they carry on and so on and so forth. But I draw the line at harassing fighters. Yeah, I've never gone on Twitter or, you know, Facebook or Instagram and started DMing fighters with abuse or atting them in tweets with abuse. I've never done that. To me, that's weird. You know what I mean? A fighter doesn't need to see my videos, you know, if I'm criticizing or anything like that. I wouldn't want to say anything directly to a fighter that I wouldn't say to them face to face in real life. Because, yeah, it's a bit fake for me to be atting a fighter on Twitter and calling them every name under the sun. But if I saw him in real life, you know, I definitely wouldn't be talking like that to them one-to-one. But in terms of, you know, armchair casuals who can only ever dream of stepping in the ring, when fighters, for example, I mean, I remember growing up, I was one of, in terms of the friends I went to school with, I think I was the only one who actually boxed. I'm trying to think now. Yeah, in terms of friends of my age, I was the only one who boxed. My younger brother boxed. I had my older brother dabbled in boxing a little bit, but he was never really that serious about it. He also did Muay Thai. One of my next oldest brother, I've got several brothers, and one of his friends also boxed. So I knew people that boxed, but in terms of like my main friend circle, I was the only one that boxed. And so their attitude towards boxing, you know, when a fighter got knocked out was very different to mine, because most of them had never been in a boxing ring. They'd never laced up a pair of gloves. So they didn't have the same level of respect, and they didn't have they didn't have as much of a realistic take on boxing as I did. So whenever they'd see someone get knocked out and, or be on wobbly legs, they'd start like saying, oh my God, he can't take a punch. Why? He should never even be boxing. What a disgrace. Somebody who's wobbling around like that. And I'm like, no one's ever punched you in the chin like that. So you literally don't know what you're talking about, And I think a lot of casuals are like that. Like, they'll see a fighter get knocked out and they'll say he's terrible, he's a disgrace, he should never have taken up boxing in the first place, and all this kind of weird stuff from people who don't know what it's like to get punched. If you've actually participated in boxing, it gives you more respect for fighters and what they do and how hard it is and all that kind of thing, for sure. A shout out to Suited and Booted for the super chat. Siuda says, I remember reading somewhere that the average male thinks he's 30 times better in a fight than they really are. I can believe that. I can actually believe that. When you've been in street fights, when you've boxed and all that kind of thing, in most cases, not for everybody, but in most cases, it actually makes you more careful. For me anyway, it made me more careful about getting into fights because I know how bad things can get. Whereas, most men haven't had many fights in their lives, if any. So there's an ignorance there in terms of what they think they can do in a fight. Whereas when you've actually been in fights and, you've been hit and been in all sorts of violent situations, you know how bad it can go. So you're less likely to want to get involved in stuff. And not just because of what could happen to you, but what you could do to them. If you're a trained fighter, I was talking about this in a stream the other day, you can end up like Ty Mitchell, where you hit someone and you literally kill him and go to prison, manslaughter, So yeah, when you've actually been in fights and boxing matches and whatever, in most cases you tend to be a bit more careful about getting into altercations outside the ring. A shout out to Suited and Booted again for the super chat. He says, well said, I've been in the ring myself. Star Fox says, road fights are way more scary. Anything can happen. Indeed. I mean, just look at, for example, road rage, right? People are so quick to honk their horn at you, shout at you, and, be tailgating you and all this kind of stuff on the road, right? I don't do that kind of stuff when I drive around. I don't start tailgating people and, acting all aggressive in my car. Because in my mind, I'm like, if you're doing that to me, you better be ready to fight me. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't like somebody being aggressive towards me for no reason. Just because you're being an idiot on the road. Yeah? You have to be ready to fight me if you're going to behave that way to me. But the average guy isn't even thinking like that. As somebody said earlier on in the chat, he thinks he's better at fighting than he actually is. Little does he know, if I got out this car, it wouldn't last 10 seconds. Do you know what I mean? So the person like me who actually can fight, who has had a lot of fights, I'm actually more polite in my driving than most of these guys who have never had a fight. All right, peeps, I'm going to wrap this one up here. Shout out to everybody, as usual, for joining me on this live. And a special shout out to everybody who donated via Super Chat. You are always appreciated. Take care of yourselves. Be good. And I'll catch you on the next one. I'm out.